leading up to those 3 days of hearings is nothing short of a marathon. I mean, I don't know what's bigger than a marathon. Is there something bigger than a marathon? It's nonstop. Get ready, get people there. One day we'll do a behind the scenes of what it takes to pull off the hearings, because I think people are fascinated by that. But the 3 days are probably the most intense for sure when the hearings are there, and because then you just learn so much. You meet so many amazing people, and I think it's almost, there's an emotional connection in a way that there are so many people who truly care about what's happening in this nation, who are willing to speak truth, who are courageous. And I think it just, those 3 days are amped by the hope and encouragement that comes from people who participate and testify and tell their stories. But they are exhausting.
They are. John, you're a farmer. This topic was near and dear to your heart and your farming community. What was those 3 days like for you?
Well, I would kind of liken it onto a rodeo, maybe a little bit. There was a few bucking incidents, but we got through it. It was fun, like working with all of the volunteers and the public that came through, visiting with everyone, seeing everybody pulled together from all these different places and come together, and really have not known each other, and then working together to put this on is a highlight to me. And that's one of the key parts, I think, for me every time we do the NCI, is just seeing the change that takes place in people. That is it's astounding to see at every place. So I think there's something special there.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've come to appreciate about the NCI. It's not just the testimony, which is, that's critically important. That's why we do this. But I've watched how a community comes together, and how people who, for the most part, often are quiet or behind the scenes, and then they start to make their contribution. And then particularly those who stand up and testify, they find their voice. They find their authority, and it changes them, and it helps them to become a leader in their community in a way that I think we hadn't expected when we began the vision of the NCI back in 2022. And so there's something transformative. It transforms the community that these hearings are held in. Yeah. At least that's my observation.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And these witnesses, when you go forward as a witness, you have to bear a lot of things. So you bear your story before everyone, and you express your thoughts and understandings. But when you do that, you also open yourself up to rejection and controversy. But when you do it, you break through. You become a new person, kind of in confidence and reality. Vulnerability is our biggest expression of love for our neighbors, our families, and our country. Is when we bear that our hearts out there through this testimony.
Well, and I think in talking to some of the witnesses, what impacted them is they got to tell their story uncensored, not the media clips, not the part that only government would listen to if they were in a battle on that front, not trying to make a ploy to the local council. They got to tell their story, they got to tell their position, they got to give the reasons why, and they got to be part of history while doing it. Just an amazing combination of factors that those stories will impact this nation moving forward for a very long time now. That the troubles that they've experienced, being put in jail in the case of Jim Ness. I mean, these are true Canadian heroes that so many people are unaware of, that are fighting the battles on behalf of the average Canadian so that you have access to good food. I mean, we call it our farmers safe in Canada, but the underlying question is if farmers aren't safe, then nobody's safe. And clearly Canada has a lot of work to do, but the impact on the witnesses from the ones I spoke to was I was listened to and I got to tell my story in my words with my experience. And that had a significant impact on them.
Well, in the reality of Canada today, the kind of conversations that we have at the National Citizens Inquiry don't happen in the rest of society, it seems. It's not happening in our mainstream journalism. It's not happening in our parliaments. It's not happening in our courts. There's these conversations. It feels like the NCI is one of the few places where you actually get enough time to unpack your testimony, and it's honored, it's respected, but it's also under oath. So there's a seriousness to this. It's in front of 4 independent commissioners who ask questions and evaluate the evidence, and will eventually write a report on it. So this is a very different experience in this country that I've come to realize is incredibly important. I mean, the model that we've been using the last couple of years is the truth matters. And it seems like this is one of the few platforms where the truth actually gets an honest expression that isn't captured or corrupted or manipulated in a way that undermines its truth and its integrity. So these are important hearings. The testimony at this was different than we've had in the past. This is the first time we've looked at the issue of farmers, and then the extension of that is food safety. And I have to admit that most of what I heard over the 3 days was new information to me. It's not an area that I was exposed to. John, I'm curious whether you learned anything in this. Was there new information for you, or was this simply an affirmation of what you already knew as a farmer?
Well, I'm probably a little different than a lot of farmers. I'm here in the NCI. This is I'm a little more curious maybe than some people. So a lot of it was affirmation for me. A lot of it was, trying to get or wanting. I was hoping that people would come forward and express some of the same things that I've lived and dealt with. Hearing Jim, again, we talk about Jim Ness. When I was starting out farming, I remember those days when we sold. I sold. I started renting land when I was, I think, 16 years old. I rented my first 300 acres, and the wheat board was still in effect then, and I was selling grain for $1 or so a bushel. A few years later, I was working on both sides of the border. I would go down and do some sales stuff in Montana. And some of my clients were cattlemen down there, and they would be buying Canadian grain for $7 US a bushel. And I was selling to the Canadian Wheat Board. They were buying from the Canadian Wheat Board. I was selling to the Canadian Wheat Board for $2 Canadian a bushel, and they were buying that same grain for $7 a bushel. And that money, that difference, just goes up in fluff, in nothing. And starting out, you could not start, and they would pay you an initial payment of 50 or 75 cents or something like that when you hauled it in. They told you how much you could haul in, where you could haul it to, and how much you could haul. And you would go in, you would deliver it, and you would get 75 cents or some nominal number per bushel. Then maybe 6 months later, they would give you another 75 cents a bushel. And then maybe a year later or something like that, they would give you the rest of it. And you're still a third of what that same grain is selling for on the world market. But it kept the the processors in Eastern Canada kept them in business because they didn't have to buy high-priced grains that way, and the rest sold into the world market. I don't know who pocketed that, but and it was completely non-transparent. You were not allowed to know how the money that came and went from the Canadian Wheat Board was used. And so I experienced that. And so listening to him again affirmed my feelings, the things that I went through as a young man. And it did bring up some emotion of that, because, it's impossible to start in farming under those type of circumstances. And how many of our youth in our communities were decimated because the youth were not able to get into farming and they left. And it's changed the community fabric of the prairies for sure. So that was something that really, really struck me. Listening to Teresa Walker and Katie and Karen talk about the culling of their herds, that resonated with me and my love of animals and cattle and stuff like that. And how someone could allow or force that on ranchers and farmers on a suspicion. That's what when Lee Turner was talking about, this is on suspicion, and it doesn't matter if we have data and proof. They work off of assumptions and suspicions. Now I go from a sadness and a brokenness to anger and my blood boiling. Oh boy, it was quite the hearing.
It was pretty intense emotionally.
Yeah.
Kari, what was it like for you? What stood out for you at those hearings?
I think the educational value, Ted, that of how overregulated our farming industry, our food supply groups are. I mean, it probably confirms to me that this tendency of government to become an industry unto itself, and the more regulations you make, the more public servants you need, the more bureaucracies you need, the more judges, the more lawyers, we are, through regulation, creating this monstrous industry called government, as opposed to the government serving the needs of the people and being enablers. Suddenly they're the regulatory bodies, based on suspicion, the vulnerability of our farmers. That, I think, is a very disconcerting reality that we have here in Canada. The fact that farmers were afraid to come and testify. How many people wanted to testify but knew that their farms would be targeted, or their organizations would lose funding, or something would happen that was an advantage to their group or their farm? That concerns me. We keep saying Canada is this free and sovereign nation, but the more we look into these issues, whether it was what happened through COVID, whether it's the appeal going through on the Emergency Program Act, whether it's the farmers now, why is government, our political leadership, so intent on not being a free and democratic nation? Why are they so intent on dictating, constraining, and commanding how Canadians shall live, what they shall eat, how they shall farm or not farm, as the case may be? The issues that unfolded for me listening to this testimony, I mean, it was educational on the front, like the Canada Agricultural Program. I mean, I'm pretty informed, never heard of that before, and how it's outperforming small family farms. There's a whole bunch of things that are going on here that make me very, very concerned about the future of our food supply here in Canada. And to see that unfold, but the thing that struck me the most was the concrete evidence that government is using control and regulation as it's developing this industry, more public servants, more control that you have. And, I think Canadians, we have to wake up to it. I think government has a perfectly good job being involved in farming and telling us what we can eat, not dictating to us what we're going to eat. If you want to put out labeling that says, hey, GMO is good for you and go for this and that, but at least label the food so people can make those choices. Why don't we have those choices? I mean, as down as something as simple as that. So it was very disturbing for me to see how government isn't working in our interest, but is putting the interest of control, constraint, regulation, big pharma, big farming ahead of the needs of Canadians. And I think listening to these testimonies, and I know we're going to have another hearing on this because of the importance of it, but that was what resonated with me. And I have found that very, very, very troubling.
Yeah, I found these hearings quite emotional, and the emotion ranged from sadness for the farmers, how difficult their passion is to raise livestock or to grow crops, and how difficult it is, the intrusion. I think over regulation in some ways isn't a strong enough word. It's really an intrusion into the process. And it surprises me that we have any farmers left in Canada that are willing to tolerate what I would describe as an abusive relationship with the regulatory bodies. But what surprised me, and John, you brought this to my attention, is I was aware of the culling of the ostriches in Edgewood, BC. That's close to where I live, and so I visited that and saw firsthand the impact of the order to cull those birds. Mm-hmm. But you brought to my attention and some of the witnesses that culling of livestock is almost a weekly event in this country. Mm-hmm. That thousands of cattle and sheep and pigs, or tens of thousands, and probably hundreds of thousands of poultry have been culled, that I would suspect that most of the public has no idea about. And one of the reasons why the ostrich situation came to the public's attention is because they refuse to be silent about it. Whereas many of the farmers are intimidated, as you said, Kari, by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And it was explained how farmers who had their livestock culled a year ago and are owed millions of dollars in compensation are still not compensated. They're waiting for the CFIA to, decide what is an appropriate compensation. And it sounds like that's more of a, that's not an even-handed discussion. It seems like it's a bit of a shakedown, maybe is the word I would use.
Yeah.
But as was mentioned, is that we actually had 3 or 4 witnesses that were eager to testify at these hearings, and were convinced by, I would suggest, those within our bureaucracy that it wasn't in their best interest to testify, and they withdrew. And so we lost those voices because of intimidation by our government.
Yeah. This is something that, as we've been working toward these hearings, we have heard from people who want to testify, and so they make this step forward. I want to testify. This is what happened to me. I've been depopulated. I want to speak about that, and XYZ took place. All the different negative aspects. And then as you get closer, they like, I had one call me and say, I had a CFIA call me yesterday, and the government does not say, if you testify, we're going to squish you or anything like that. They just, it might take a little bit longer for you to get paid, if just checking in, and they know what that means. And so there's that kind of, it's intimidation. It's a hidden type of hidden intimidation. I've had people who also had their animals culled, maybe not an entire herd, but some of them. And I'm like, well, what did you do to push back against that? And they said, if we push back, we will get no compensation.
Right.
And that's their exact words to me. Even with the ostrich farm, they've expressed publicly that they are concerned that they may receive a bill for the culling of their herd
Instead of compensation.
Yeah. So, and the government needs to start thinking about this. The whole reason to have compensation is because then people will come forward and will allow, they won't hide their sick animals and stuff. And so we can keep a healthier industry and national herd. But if with these strong arm tactics, I think it's gone. What we're seeing from the testimony is that it's going from incentivizing to punitive type actions. And that's a concerning thing to start hearing. And you hear it at the NCI. Everything else, as you said, I testified, and so in my testimony, I have footnotes, and we didn't play it there, but we have evidence that even our advocacy groups are captured and speaking propaganda instead of advocating for the farmers. Mm-hmm. So it's things like the NCI and other non-traditional advocacy aspects that will let the testimony of the people be heard. And our job as NCI is not to be the advocate necessarily. I'm not sure if that's the right terminology. We don't come to the conclusions. The commissioners do, based upon the evidence. Mm-hmm. And the evidence so far that I've heard, it makes me concerned for the safety of farmers.
Ted, I want to pick up on something that John said, because I think this is really, really important to Canada as a whole, right? What we heard was responsible farmers. And I mean, I think most people who have livestock and farming want to take care of the land. They want to take care of their animals. If they don't have healthy animals, they're not going to be farming for long. And we've gone from this position of where we used to trust the government to now very few people trust the government. The public trust has been breached, has been lost. Public confidence in the decision making is I don't even think the term questionable is. I think it's been lost. And the issues that are being raised at the National Citizens Inquiry, any government elected leader who truly cares about this nation and Canadians ought to listen very carefully to what's transpiring here across Canada. And they need to listen to these testimonies, and they probably need to meet with some of these farmers, because these farmers have solutions. But if we continue to go down this road where public confidence is lost, public trust is lost, and think how vulnerable we are. You just have to look back to the COVID situation on how vulnerable people were. Everything got shut down. What if, and I've seen a video of Theresa Tam and Bonnie Henry, two of the key players in the COVID lockdowns, talking about the next pandemic being zoological. They talk about, cows getting avian flu. In the news, we see avian flu in cats. Do we really trust these people, or are we being set up again for something that didn't really turn out very good for the government with the evidence that is now coming out? I refer to the 2023 hearings of the NCI, which seem to be ahead of its time. Because why do we have a prime minister who's locking out from public view the findings of how the COVID-19 vaccine adverse effects was? For 15 years, Canadians aren't going to be able to hear and understand exactly what the government knew. You know, things like that don't bode well for how we're doing government. And I think looking forward, the NCI is going to play a very significant role in what kind of elected leaders we must elect, not want to elect or whatever's convenient. You know, our future, our ability to have access to good food is reliant upon those people we put into public office. And I think, you know, a lot of people need to look, Canadians need to look and ask their elected officials, you know, did you watch the NCI hearings into, you know, Are Farmers Safe in Canada? They need to ask anybody who wants to be their elected official, their representative, what they're going to do about these problems, because these are real, in now time, real time problems that we need solutions to. And if we don't find them, we're going to be in a bad place.
Mm-hmm. You know, we're looking right now at has anybody filled their vehicle with fuel lately and seen the price changes have taken place? And the reason why we have, and most nations try to build their farmer base up, is because it's a national security issue to ensure that our people are fed properly and healthily. And it's concerning to see the testimonies that are pointing us in a different direction. We will see the increase in food prices. We will see the increase in lack of selection of food and possibly empty store shelves if we continue down paths like what we're hearing. Culling of the animals will result in a loss of animal proteins in our diet. And I think if you look at some of the vision casting that the Canadian government is doing, you can see what the CFIA is carrying out is just part of a government policy. It's their vision for the future of Canada. It's concerning to see, and we hear it, that concern through the NCI.
Well, John, and that speaks to the testimony that you gave at the NCI. I had a dinner with a group of people the day after the NCI, and I asked them which testimony was the most important to you, what was the most impactful, and they all said the testimony that you gave, John. And you mapped out how, you talk about forecasting, how what appears to be the plan is to restrict Canadians' access to food, remove our access to natural proteins like through livestock, and replace it with lab grown and manufactured protein or insect proteins. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't just speculation. You actually provided solid evidence of that plan being put forward. Maybe you just want to speak to that for a moment. Well,
it's a concerning thing, and it was with a little bit of trepidation that I became a witness, knowing what is coming and seeing these pieces has been part of my consulting work for 20 years. And the plan has been put forward by various countries. This isn't just isolated to Canada alone. We're seeing this in Holland, we're seeing it in England, we're seeing it in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the United States. All of these countries have the same plans trying to be implemented. Control of the food is critical to controlling the people. When I was involved in some food security work, like in Egypt and Middle East, you see there that some of those uprisings was due to people being hungry, and then that being used to instigate insurrection and rebellion against government systems. And it was used by insurgents who came in upon a hungry people and convinced them that food would be the result of them rising up and helping overthrow their government. We should be concerned about that in every country, not just for our own existing government, but basically because of who is the forces that will cause these people to rise up. Hungry people will do what needs to be done to get fed. And so that is a concern. We've seen it over and over in other countries. The people that are at the heart of controlling this are the same names that keep showing up whenever there is a discussion about decreasing population. They're the same names that keep showing up, and they're owning the products that were put out during COVID. They're owning the products that are being prepared to come out during an induced famine. And we can say, well, that's just conspiracy, but they've stated their plan. Like you said, everything I said in my testimony, I documented with evidence and in their words from their own writings. And it's time. I think one of the things that even more than our elected officials, this is when the people must stand up. If the elected officials stand up, they will only do so if the people stand up, because the people on the other side who are doing this to us are the major donors. They're the ones funding the elections. So elected officials will not listen to John Graff or Kari Simpson or Ted Kuntz or Mr. Smith, who goes to Washington. They won't listen to them. They will listen just to the masses when they stand up. And that's where we're getting to. We need people. So hopefully that's what my testimony would help do. It gives people, I'm hoping that people have confidence when they see a clear pathway that the other side is doing and documented evidence of that. That's what we would hope.
Kari, what was the testimony that was the most impactful for you?
Well, Ted, I think from what angle? I felt like a ping pong ball a couple of days, because on one hand, you have, this amazing farmer named Dawn Bouchette, and she's so passionate and all she wanted to do was farm. And yet she can't farm because she can't compete in how the regulatory bodies work. Then you have Jim Ness talking about the insanity associated with the wheat board, that he has to go to jail to get attention brought to it. Then you had Maxime Bernier, talking about real issues, milk quotas. Like, why are we dumping milk when, we could be lowering prices and giving people options? Why can't we label foods? Why do we in Canada don't have the right to know if we're eating crickets in our food packaging, right? So it was, and then of course, that John Graff person, he had to go and, just put it so succinctly about what's really transpiring here. And, I think people need to, we have the benefit of living in an era where we have history behind us. Nothing new under the sun kind of thing at this point. We have the ability to anticipate what government is going to do when we see a pattern. And we're seeing a pattern here. There's a pattern being formed, and I don't like what it's forming, Ted, right? It's going to be very interesting to see what our commissioners come out with when they do the final report. It's going to be interesting to see what happens at the next set of hearings. But, what we do at the NCI is we give people access to good information to make decisions in an informed way I mean, the documents that John Graff provided, were just troubling, but, revealing at the same time. We can't ignore what is in front of us. And I think if Canadians continue to be distracted from the realities that are converging upon us, we're in big trouble. If Canadians come together and say, look, we don't like the picture that's being painted here. You know how a painting starts out and you have no idea what the artist is doing, right? And then at some point, there's enough color, there's enough shading, there's enough lines in that picture to see what's really going on. And at that point, you can decide whether you want to change the picture. And I think we need to change that picture. I think we have enough of that information on that political canvas at this point that's strongly suggesting to us that, we need to change the lines here. And without Canadians standing up, you can have large donors, you can have all those things, but you know what? Those dollars and those donations can never outperform millions of Canadians coming together under agreed upon issues and saying, we want to change the direction here. And I think those testimonies that we heard, and there were so many good ones, it's going to be really great to have them up and available to people to go and listen to. But I'm pretty excited about the next set of hearings because we're kind of a little bit more informed on things now and how extensive the regulatory effect. And John, to what you said about this isn't just happening in Canada. And I think that's the real troubling part here is you see these things happening. Somebody said, we've got to invite Jeremy Clarkson, Clarkson Family Farm. Okay. So I got home from the hearings after spending way too many hours on the Coquihalla, stuck in an accident, traffic jam. But I came home, started watching, and it was like, oh my gosh, just to watch the regulations and what farmers in the UK have to jump through. And I'm only like in chapter 1 to 5 at this point. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do what it is, but we see what's happening down in the States. Why is it mirroring what's happening here in Canada on livestock tracking and premise ID? Like there's some bigger umbrella organization like the UN that seems to be dictating where we're moving on all of these things. So it's time that Canadians became informed. You have no choice. You don't have the luxury of being ignorant, I think, at this point. If you want to feed your family and have food choice, you do not have the luxury of being ignorant. You need to get informed. And I'll tell you, any one of these testimonies, Jordan Keeley, the MLA from BC, Northern BC, he was great. What an advocate for farmers. It just goes on. Carrie Lynn Finley, even talking about land ownership now. And I think there was some great, insightful conversations between her and our lead counsel, Paul Jaffe. People, if you own a house, you want to watch that, whether you're a farmer or not. There's so many issues at this point that are directly affecting farmers, homeowners, land use in Canada it's all one-stop shop at the National Citizens Inquiry. At least that's how I felt it. We should only be concerned about what we don't know. You have every ability to be in the know by watching many, many, many of these testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I felt like the testimonies pulled back the curtain on the issue of food safety in this country. Yeah. And I think most of us, myself included, under the illusion like Canada should be rich in food. I mean, we have so much land compared to the number of the population in this country. But what was mapped out during those 3 days really undermined my confidence that our food supply is safe in this country. Mm-hmm. And listening to the hardships of the farmers, I wonder how, I think I've said, how any farmer persists under that level of abuse. And it really does sound like abuse to me. But John, you talked about how the takeover by corporate farming. I think you said it's on track for what the Western provinces to have the entire farming community controlled by 5 corporations or something. That this is not the illusion of farming that most of us grew up with, and thinking of the farmer down the street and he's got some cows and he's got some grain and grows some vegetables. I mean, the rules and the policies are forcing the average farmer out of his business, and now we're subjected to corporate decisions. And what was often explained by many of the witnesses is decisions that are coming not even from within this country. They're coming from bodies that are international bodies, that the CFIA is justifying the culling of animals based upon international partners or international agreements. And so the decision making on the health of our livestock is so far removed from the farmer that it may not even be within this continent, and that was disturbing.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've found disturbing in working with the producers and farmers around is a lot of the testing that does happen is controlled by organizations like the World Health Organization, which dictate our Canadian food safety things. But even more than that is when you hear Lee Turner talk about that the culling of the animals is based upon suspicion. And even if you do obtain negative tests to prove that your animals are healthy, they will disregard those negative tests and continue with the culling because they will base it on the previous suspicion. Okay, I don't think anybody can live with that kind of ludicrous. That's insanity.
Well, and that's what got mapped out, is they could have known the health of those birds within 48 hours, and they refused to allow testing to happen and threatened the farmers with $200,000 fines and jail time, I think, if they were going to test those ostriches. And none of that makes any sense. And that was one of the lines that I think got repeated more often than any, is this just doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense if you think it's about food safety or about the government caring about our farmers. But if there's a different agenda, if the agenda is to create food scarcity, to control the population through hunger, now many of these measures seem to make a whole lot more sense. And we don't, as you said, we don't have the luxury of staying in the illusion of Farmer Jones down the block. That doesn't exist any longer. And probably the testimony that I found most disturbing was Lee Turner's, where he mapped out the fact that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency only has to have suspicion to kill livestock in this country. They don't have to have evidence. They don't have to justify their position. There's no accountability for them. There was no way to stop that culling from happening. I think we lived under the illusion that the proper legal arguments, or somebody finally sense would get made, or testing would be permitted that would justify or not the culling. None of that seemed to happen in this country. And it means to me that if you're a farmer with livestock, you're very much at the mercy of bureaucrats that have no real accountability to making the best decision.
Yeah. And Ted, the other thing that is interesting about that, and what we had happen at the NCI, is while we had all this great testimony, we didn't hear from the CFI, despite being invited personally.
Right.
The Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Health, none of these people bothered to show up to explain that. And I also, the other parties that were missing to this on the ostrich front, because during the first court proceedings, there was an issue raised about provincial jurisdiction and whether British Columbia had some say in what was going on here. And the first judge from the federal court found that was a valid question. Where was the provincial government? Why aren't they showing up to explain themselves? Why didn't they show up in the court hearing? So there's a lot going on in these matters. And the people of Canada deserve a response. They deserve an explanation. And clearly we're not getting it. So all you people on the live stream out there, you should be writing to the Paul McKinnon, the president of the CFIA, asking him why he didn't show up at the NCI. I mean, this is where public pressure. We're going to hold another hearing. We'll accommodate. I think you were saying, Ted, at one of the meetings, you're willing to work around their schedules.
Yeah, that's my suggestion, is that we write a formal invitation to Paul McKinnon, who's the president of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, to the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Health, and say, we will conduct hearings on your availability. You just tell us when you're available and we'll arrange for it. You can testify virtually, and we can do it with literally a moment's notice. And we'll see whether they're willing to come forward and justify the decisions and the policies of the Canadian government.
You realize you just gave all of our volunteers a heart attack, right? And a moment's notice. Can we at least have 3 weeks notice, Ted? You know what, Ted? I think that letter, when it goes off, we also need to publish it in our newsletter and on our website, right? Because I think people want to stay informed. Then they'll have all the contact information for these people. They can follow up with a letter themselves, and people can subscribe to our newsletter just simply by going to the website, nationalcitizensinquiry.ca, guys, as in Canada, nationalcitizensinquiry.ca. Yes, you will learn how to spell inquiry. People go, how do you spell inquiry, Kari? There's no E before the Y, guys. So nationalcitizensinquiry.ca. Subscribe to our newsletter. It's a wealth of information. They get a message from you, Ted. I think every week you put a message out. Do you not? Lots to talk about.
This is an important time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
we should talk about where we're going to go forward here. We've recognized that we need to hold at least another set of hearings on this topic, that there were far too many witnesses that wanted to testify, and I'm still hoping that those that agreed to testify and then were convinced not to, that maybe there's a way that they'll step forward anyways and provide their testimony. I think the fact that they were discouraged tells me that the government is afraid of their testimony, and that's the kind of information we need to hear. And then at this point, I on the website is just the full day recording of the hearings, but they will be, in the next week or two, they'll be broken down by individual witness, and it'll make it a little easier to find the testimonies that you're looking for. And then our commissioners are going to begin their report on this topic. They will write a final report when we conclude the hearings on this topic. But I wouldn't be surprised if they submit some kind of interim report, because the information that came out was absolutely critical for Canadians to understand.
I think they have a lot of questions that they would like some answers to, and make part of the report. It'll be interesting to see if the government responds or provides an opportunity to become part of that public record. So it's I think moving forward, there's going to be a lot of I know I've been inundated with people going, Kari, I want to testify. People always, even though we go to all these efforts to make people aware, it's like, I didn't know this was happening, Kari. I didn't know this is going on. Okay, then you need to take responsibility, people. You need to become involved in the NCI. You need to read the newsletters, or at least go to the website or our social media, find out what's going on. Thank you to everybody who supports us financially too, Ted. We have just been blessed with generous donors who understand the importance of having the people of Canada have a position of power to investigate, to make this inquiry, to tell people the truth. And without your support, we just can't do these hearings. So we're very, very fortunate to have dedicated people who contribute to this very important work. I think this work is essential, Ted.
Well, and I think what makes it so important is it is a citizen-led, citizen-funded initiative. It's not tainted by politics or corporate interests. our commitment is to the truth. And I think the platform that we've created is absolutely essential to the health of this country, to the security of this country. And we recognize that it needs to continue.
And I think you got some exciting news for next week. It looks like one of the commissioners, Vince Gerses, is going to be joining this live stream from a commissioner perspective. And I think that perspective is very different than what we on the board level do. The commissioners have a very prominent role to play in this organization. They ask the questions. They have a responsibility and a duty to bring forward truth, hard truth in some cases. We've had a great panel at this last hearing, Ted. We had a new commissioner who brought a wealth of information and experience from not only the farming community, but the legal community. Dan Harder was just exceptional and a welcome new addition. We're getting quite a collection of commissioners now available. We'll be able to run 2 or 3 different hearings a year pretty soon, Ted.
John, any last words to sum up this live stream?
Well, I just want to thank you guys as well and the rest of the board for working over the years. And we've put, with God guiding us, we've put together an organization here that I think is doing something that is looked upon from the rest of the world with envy. There is a need for the citizens to have an independent inquiry into government and institutional actions that we are seeing affect our people and affect our country. This is just the beginning, I think, of where this can go. And if the citizens realize this is your inquiry, and we are honored to be able to be the ones that are helping get it going and bring truth into this discussion.
We're looking for our next venue and our next city for the hearings. And so if there's people out there that would like us to come to your community, send us an email and tell us the resources that you have to be able to help us put together a hearing. And we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah.
Kari and John, thanks for joining me on this NCI Live. And I look forward to having our audience join us again next week as we dig into this a little bit more.
Yep. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Always good to be with you, Ted.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Ted. And thank you to everyone out there that's supported and volunteered. Thanks.